leadership, I think about how are you able to leverage whatever talent you have, be that education, being smart, be it being charismatic. How are you going to leverage that towards bringing a bunch of people together around a shared goal?
Dr. Derrick Gay retraces his career journey on this episode of the Leadership Backstory. We learn about his journey from music to teaching and administrating to founding a consultancy that's partnered with over 500 organizations across numerous sectors to deepen D&I capacity, enhance inclusion and engagement, attract, hire, and retain the best talent, and design strategy to maximize business and education goals. There are lots of leadership lessons packed into this episode. I'm Peter Barron. Brendan Schneider and I learned a lot, and we know you will too, so let's get started. Hey everyone, I'm Peter Barron.
And I'm Brendan Schneider.
Yeah, and welcome to the Leadership Backstory. Brendan, today we have, let me just put it this way. It isn't often that we get to speak to somebody who's a professional opera singer, and today is one of those days. I'm really excited about it. It's somebody that I've worked with over the last 3 or 4 years, have gotten to know, really appreciate the way he's built his business and works with his customers, and there's just a lot to learn here. And today's guest is Dr. Derrick Gay. Derrick, welcome to the podcast.
Glad to be here. I feel like I should start by singing something, but maybe that's later in the conversation.
Oh, Brendan and I were like, okay, we got to figure out how to get him to sing us something during this podcast. Hey, Derrick, for those those folks who haven't had a chance to work with you or have, learned about your services, just quickly, like, set up the work that you do now, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah. So I am currently a diversity and inclusion strategist, working with organizations both here in the United States and abroad, on issues of diversity and inclusion. So really thinking about how we can cultivate organizations that are representative of the broad talent that we have out in the world. I always like to say that excellence is represented everywhere, and opportunity isn't always. So it's equally distributed, but opportunity isn't. And then within those organizations, thinking about how we have inclusive environments where folks have the resources that they need to thrive and to flourish. And those organizations range from schools, both here in the United States and international schools. I work with Sesame Street, lots of nonprofits. I work with the Frick Museum in New York City, and working with Barilla, working with folks in financial services, working with Phantom of the Opera as their consultant. So really working with law firms over across many industries and many countries. So I really appreciate the work that I'm doing. I pinch myself that my passion is my vocation.
Yeah, isn't that interesting how you make your passion your vocation? And I have had the good privilege of being one of your clients, and just mesmerized by the way you're able to help organizations, think about building something that is much more of a inclusive, belonging community. You're brilliant at it, and I just couldn't wait to bring you on here today. So yeah, we'll obviously talk about that, but I am super interested to understand, how did you get to this place? And I often joke at the beginning of each pod is like, our greatest research tool is LinkedIn. So people are probably getting pretty sick of me talking about LinkedIn, but it's the thing that we return to frequently. And I don't know, like, I love to go all the way back to your days in college, because I see you went to Oberlin, and then you've got some work that you've done at Penn and Teachers College. Like, talk about the role of education in terms of building early leadership lessons for you. Like, what were some of the things that you're able to pluck out of those early days?
Wow, it's a great question. So I think about, I was just having a conversation yesterday with someone, really priming the prompt for this conversation. I'm giving a commencement address this year, my first commencement address, actually.
Wow. Very cool.
At the Merit Music School. And the Merit Music School is a tuition-free school here in Chicago, where I live and where I was born, that I attended. I started there in 7th grade, and I went 7th through 12th grade. And it's there that I learned to play the violin. It's there that I learned to play the viola. It's there that I learned to play piano. It's there that I started to sing professionally. It's there that I really fell in love with music. And what I love about the school is that the idea isn't necessarily to create the next Itzhak Perlman, or to, quote some people who actually graduate from the school, the next Anthony McGill or the next Damari McGill, who are big names in classical music. The goal of the school really was to, I think, create better people
Yeah.
and create a better world. And when I think about the role of music in particular, because you asked about college, by the time I got to Oberlin, I was in love with music, in love with languages, in love with people and humanity. And going there was like being a kid in a candy shop, because it was there that I lived for the first time in my first international community. So there were people from all over the world at Oberlin. Certainly, anyone who knows about Oberlin, they think about its commitment to social justice, its commitment to, it was the first college to admit women. It was the first college to admit Black people. It was the first college to have co-ed dorms. It's been in the forefront of every sort of social justice movement in the United States. So I was really excited about that. But it was there that becoming a musician and singing vowels and learning different languages and interacting with different folks. And also my other major was in Romance languages, that I learned the skills that I would need to be successful today. So right now I'm not singing at the Metropolitan Opera. I'm not singing at La Scala. And I'm a musician. Music is critical to who I am and how I see myself. And some of the skills that I learned from music, in retrospect, really set the roadmap for where I am today. I think about skills around discipline. I mean, you're there in that practice room your whole life. I think about skills around receiving critical feedback. You have 2 lessons a week with your teacher, where it is literally, you need to modify this vowel. You need to stand like this. You need to breathe from here. You're not projecting enough here. I need more articulation on this consonant. You're interacting and collaborating with people. The singer's never singing alone. You're with the pianist. You're with an orchestra. You're with the cast. So this building up EQ, you have to be a successful musician. You're always in interaction with other people. This idea of thinking about humanity, there's nothing more vulnerable than singing or playing a piano or playing a violin. You're literally putting yourself out there and hoping that people will accept you in the spirit in which you're offering your most coveted, your most vulnerable thing you have, which is yourself and your spirit. And I think of the improvisation that comes with being a singer. You practice as much as you can, and you have to do what's the best that you can in that moment. And just being extemporaneous. Those are all skills that have set me up for the work that I'm doing today.
But so when you graduated from Oberlin, you decided not to, maybe you were running things in parallel, and I just, there's a story there that we can dig into, but you made this decision to teach. And I'm curious, like, what moved you in that direction versus, I don't know, did you contemplate just going all in on music, or is that just not a thing that people can do? I don't know how all that works.
Yeah, people do go all in on music, and indeed at the Oberlin Conservatory, this is a world-class conservatory where most of my classmates are now playing in professional symphonies, playing in professional opera houses, singing in professional opera houses. They're making their living singing or playing the violin. Most of my classmates, that's what they do. I go and support them when I go to Lyric Opera, when I go to New York City Opera, when I go to the Metropolitan Opera. But I was always following 2 parallel paths. One was around academia and one was around being a professional musician. And, I did both at Oberlin. So I studied at Oberlin Conservatory and Oberlin College. And my teacher, brilliant man, his name was Professor Richard Miller. And there were a number of us who were what they call double degree. And he said something to me which really resonated with me, and I'm so glad he said it to me. He said, if you do not wake up every morning and the first thing you think about is singing, and you could think of nothing else to do all day, then you should not become a professional singer. And I said to him, I think about a lot of other things beyond singing. And there we were, right? And so, it was, I continued to sing, but my passion of mine really was also was teaching, and it was being with people. So that's why I went into education. So this idea of when I wake up every morning, what is it I think about? I think about being in community with folks and thinking about how I can push myself to find the best things in them to sort of leverage those to help them be the best people they can be. And that's what a classroom was for me. So I taught middle school and upper school French, Spanish, and music,
Yeah.
and loved every moment in the classroom. I was always a nerd, and here being a nerd was celebrated. Here,
Yeah.
reading lots of books was celebrated, and the idea that I had this generation in front of me, and that I could give them this skill of either music or language,
Hmm.
and in that teach them about different cultures and to acknowledge and affirm who they were. That was the best thing ever. I couldn't wait to design the lessons and then teach them the next day. I couldn't wait to find the next song to share with them so we could learn about the imperfect subjunctive. I couldn't, wait to use the latest trick I had learned from opera class to teach them how to roll an R. And some of my greatest teaching memories still I have today is now going on the Facebook, and you're old when you put an article in front of Facebook, and you're old if you have a Facebook account, but going on and seeing my former students and seeing that they're using their linguistic skills, they're traveling all
Yeah.
around the world. Many of them have become teachers or administrators, or they're off in the business world,
Right.
and they're using their linguistic skills and just their open-mindedness.
I want to come back to that, but before we do, you had, when your professor asked you that question, like, is the
Yes.
first thing that you think about, is it music in the morning?
Yeah.
Did you think you were going to be a musician before he asked that question? Or, like, what did that feel like when you gained that clarity?
It's a great question because some people, they ask, were you offended that he said that?
Yeah.
Did you feel as if he was crushing your dream when he said that? And, because I was double degree and had my hands in many pots, I knew that I could be successful at whatever I put my mind to. And I knew that because by the time I had gotten to Oberlin, I had gone through a lot of hoops to get to that fancy school. Starting off in my neighborhood school that was under resourced, and going to another neighborhood public school that was somewhat more resourced, but still very under resourced. So you then have a teacher who in that school said, "Derrick, I see something in you, and I know you're working as hard as you can, but you need to be surrounded by, you need to be challenged more. So I'm going to recommend you go to this next school." And so I got to Newberry Math and Science Academy, which is a whole different world for me. Working, studying with and becoming friends with solid middle class kids who grew up with, the mom and the dad who were doctors and lawyers, and they went to the museums and all these things, which was not my background at all. And then feeling as if I had sort of I had to catch up by the time I was in fifth grade, and then going from that program to yet another hoop, which is another magnet school in Chicago called Whitney Young, where one of our famous alums is Michelle Obama, going there to being the top of my Newberry Math and Science Academy, which is a wonderful place, to now going to this prestigious 7 through 12 school called Whitney Young, where I was with the top of the top from the city, and thinking now I'm at the bottom of the barrel again, and scratching my way there and working and learning to play these instruments and spending my Saturdays at Merit learning all of these things. So by the time I got to Oberlin, I had metacognition. I knew how to learn. I knew how to look at myself diagnostically and see, what am I good at? What am I not good at? What do I have the time to learn? What are my interests? And if I really put my mind to it, I know I can do it. So when he asked me, if you wake up every morning and if singing is not what you do, should you become a singer? I didn't see it as an insult. I saw it as, this man knows me, has worked with me for 5 years now, and he's looking out for my best interests. So I figure if I wanted to be a singer, yes, I think I could have become a singer. Would I have been singing at the Metropolitan Opera? Probably not. Because what I've learned now is to become an effective singer, you just have to learn technique, be a good person, get your language, get your diction, and put practice to it. So it would have been a very different path. And had I taken that path, I wouldn't be having this conversation with you now. I wouldn't be working around the world with all of these organizations doing the work that I'm doing.
Yeah. Once you got into the classroom and you were able to fuel this passion, like what kind of leadership lessons emerged there? Because I'm looking, and you moved from, being a classroom teacher to an administrator. Like, what were the things that you gained along that part of your journey?
Yeah. So by the time I got to the classroom, I think one of the leadership qualities that I learned from teaching was, one, just the importance. I learned this from singing as well, and from playing violin and viola and conducting as well. The importance of preparation. And I learned that success, and someone told me this when I was in high school, and it really resonated with me. Success is opportunity plus preparation. If you're not prepared, you can't take advantage of the opportunity. So, I have a friend now who just made his debut at the Metropolitan Opera, amazing singer. Lemmy Pulliam is his name. And he reminded me of the lesson. He said, you have to stay ready. You have to stay prepared in order to take advantage of these opportunities. So in the classroom, I learned about preparation. In the classroom, I learned about improvisation. In the classroom, I learned about the importance not only of the content of the message, but the way in which it's delivered. I mean, I had 5 audiences a day, classes.
All right.
And
Yeah.
I had to somehow determine, how am I going to make this grammar? How am I going to make agreement of adjectives with past participles? How am I going to make that meaningful? And so that was a leadership lesson, because leadership, I think about how are you able to leverage whatever talents you have, be that education, being smart, be it being charismatic. How are you going to leverage that towards bringing a bunch of people together around a shared goal? And if my goal is, I want you to learn the subjunctive, and I know that this class loves baseball, then I'm going to write a paragraph using subjunctive in baseball. That's how I'm going to reach this audience. And that's something in the work that I do. Now they have fancy terms, EQ, reading the room, all of these things. But it's getting a sense of who's in front of me, what is the value proposition to that group, and how can I meet them where they are to go where we need to go together. One of the best leadership moments I learned. Another leadership great piece of advice that someone gave me when I was a teacher and about to transition to become an administrator. As an administrator, I was director of community life and diversity. And the piece of advice that this person gave me was that you don't always have to have the answer, and you don't have to be the smartest person in the room.
Yeah.
That was super, super important for me, because until then, I actually thought I had to be the smartest person in the room.
Right.
You can imagine suffering someone from imposter syndrome, coming from under-resourced schools and getting to all the places that I've been, and thinking I was always sort of catching up and wondering when somehow someone's going to find out that I'm actually not as smart as they think I am, right? And then recognizing that to be an effective leader, you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. And in fact, you want to surround yourself with people who are probably smarter than you, so that you can learn and grow and sort of figure out what is it that you do well and what is it that you do less well, and surround yourself by people who do things better than you. So that was an important lesson as well. And the idea that you don't have to, I mentioned, you don't have to solve everyone's problems. Sometimes people just want you to create space for them to be affirmed and validated, that they have the right to be who they are, or the right to have the perspective that they have.
Did Derrick, before we get to the administrator role, and clearly what I think you're saying here is that you can be a leader without having a title, but it seems like through your history that you were increasingly getting leadership roles. Did you seek those roles out, or were they drawn to you? A little bit of both?
It's interesting. I think, one's perception and how one is perceived are quite different. You know, my version of the story is that I didn't seek them out. My friend's version of this is that I always sought them out, because I was always thinking about how can I affect greater change at scale. And so if it's not in the Spanish classroom or it's not teaching French, then it is directing the musical, right? So I directed the school. Well, in high school, I directed musicals, right? At that point, even I said, if singing in the choir is one thing, but if I really want to impact that scale, I just conduct. I conduct the musical, right?
Right.
So I can have some type of input on the musicians, on the libretto, on the staging. As a teacher, I thought, well, I have some type of impact in the classroom. I'd have greater impact leading the diversity group. I would have even greater impact starting a gospel choir. I have greater impact creating a group, an affinity group for parents and daughters of students of color to help everyone. I have even greater impact if I go to Columbia and get a master's in education in the Klingency program. So I think I was always seeking out ways that I could do more. And in my youth, I saw them also as opportunities to further develop my skill set.
So, oh God, a lot of questions here. But before I get to some, what did you learn? So when you made the transition to an administrator, like how did things change? I mean, what kind of lens did you look through from that role?
Yeah, I think one of the greatest challenges around being an administrator is having that 25,000 foot lens.
Yeah.
And not only thinking about the purview of your classroom, but also thinking about how your actions are going to impact layers of the organization. And how one of the challenges is that there's this sense of competing interests. If you're thinking about a school, that if you're thinking about students and the interaction with parents and then the faculty and the staff and the board and these other things, that it's often sort of thinking about how can I best support each of these groups in ways that sometimes feels mutually incompatible. The other piece that was difficult, somewhat challenging for me, if I'll be truly honest and vulnerable, is that I had to grow thicker skin. And certainly that's something I am grateful for now as a consultant in diversity and inclusion. Certainly you need thick skin. As an administrator, everyone isn't going to like you.
Right.
And even when you're doing the right thing, even when you're doing something that's going to provide the maximum benefit for the most amount of people, there are going to be people who aren't going to like you. There are going to be people who are going to don't like you because they're just oppositional to the role. There are people who are not going to like you because they don't like people in leadership. There's going to be people who just don't like you, period. And certainly I experienced lots of that when I became the messenger around diversity and inclusion in the school that I was working at. So that was difficult because here you are, many people in my role, and often I would argue many leaders also go into leadership because they do want to affect change. And in my role, you like people. I mean, I like people a lot. That's why I became a teacher. That's why I'm a musician. I enjoy being with people.
Right.
So to engage in a space where you're doing your best to try to advance humanity and do the best for folks, and the fact that some people just don't like you, that was hard. That was really difficult for me as a leader, and still sometimes difficult. Yeah. I have to sort of compartmentalize that.
How did you react to that in the moment when you realized it?
How did I react to it? I mean, it was somewhat expected.
Yeah.
It was expected again because of my journey. Coming from, the little poor kid in the under-resourced school, I had been in many types of situations where people had either challenged me, my intellect, challenged my ability, underestimated who I was, or for just a number of reasons just didn't like me. And so I had to build resilience around that and learn how to still difficult
Yeah.
to compartmentalize that. So when I saw it, I recognized it. I recognized it as this is not necessarily, Derrick, about you.
Right. Did you have mentors along the way?
Oh God, did I have mentors? Yes. I've had mentors, that's why I'm here where I am today. I've had mentors from the beginning. I had mentors in my family. I had mentors at church. I had mentors in school. I think about uh, Miss Poniatowski in third grade, who said, you need to go to this other school where I'm teaching, to go to Newberry. I think about Mademoiselle Payne in seventh grade, who was my French teacher, who challenged me she saw that, I was a precocious kid, but I also was a little mischievous. I sort of like to throw paper airplanes and all these things. So she knew she had to get to me. And she said, if you're so smart, why don't you, these were literally her words, if you're so smart, why don't you join this national French competition called the Grand Concours? And you'll have to study a lot because you're just learning French. It's going to be really hard. I'm not sure if you can do it. But if you come to lunch every day, I'll help you. And I was like, oh, a challenge, really? She became a mentor. She introduced me to theater. She would take me to the Shakespeare Theater Company. She introduced me to Greek food. She introduced me to French culture and language. She was a really great mentor and gave me a lot of hard love. I think about Duffy Adelson, who was the president of Merit Music Program, who was also my orchestra conductor when I was growing up, and who now is a good friend, and we sit on boards together, talk about full circle. And how much she supported me. I think about my teacher in college, Professor Miller, who supported me. So many people. Dorothy Hutchison, who was a head of school at Nightingale Banford, who gave me some tough love lessons. She was the one that told me, you don't have to always have an answer for everything, Derrick. I think about Professor Presidis at Teachers College. I think about so many people. I mean, the list goes on and on. I feel so fortunate that so many people throughout the course of my life have pulled me over to the side. So it's gone out of their way to say, I see something in you and I want to support you.
Yeah. We've talked to some guests in the past, and this concept of like a personal board of directors, people that you can lean on in tough times, keep you in check, encourage you, doing all the things. Like I'm guessing you have that group of people in your corner. Yeah,
absolutely. And with the advent of technology and the WhatsApp and all these things, I have a group of friends on different WhatsApp and iChat and these things that we talk all the time, all day long. We're talking,
right?
And they really keep me in check. Some of these people are famous musicians, they're famous scholars, they're famous actors, and with them, I'm Derrick. They're not impressed by anything I do. They're still calling me names, right? They're still like, you think you're this, but you're nothing, right? I saw that. I listened to your TED Talk. It was okay. We jab each other and give each other critical feedback. But the key, and these are people that I can be 100% vulnerable with, and you say, you know what? I think I blew this one up. Like I think I messed this up. And they're like, well, tell me about it. Well, yeah, sounds like you did mess that up, right? And like, what did you learn from that? The people that, I can go, I have a really good friend also who's she's in this space of diversity and inclusion. She works with lots of schools, and I can go to her and she just gets it. She knows what it's like to live on a plane and to give it your all, and it works most of the time, but sometimes you may regret something that you said, and how do you clean it up, and how do you decompartmentalize some of these things? So I have that board of directors. Now, the other question that I think is important that I'm looking at now, as I think about my eyesight that is every day deteriorating, other things, that now I'm thinking about not only my board of directors, but at this stage of my career also, I'm thinking about who's my legacy.
Yeah.
How do I pay it forward? That's something that's very much on my mind. Thinking about my journey, and I've had mentors. I want to give back, and so I actively seek out opportunities to give
Yeah.
back, and not only at the organizational level, so, being philanthropic and all these things, but individuals. So who is going to continue with
Right.
this work?
Right.
I only have maybe another 30 years doing this.
Yeah.
So yeah, who's going to
Yeah.
inherit this? Who can I support in the way that so many have supported me?
Derrick, that resonates, really deeply. Brendan, I'm guessing it does for you too. I mean,
Yeah.
that's why we started this podcast, was like, we've had really good mentors along the way. People have supported us. We want to be able to share stories like of folks like you, of Jason Brooks, of, Christine Evans. I mean, all these people who have had incredible careers, but it took years to get to where they are, and they had to suffer through some tough times. And I don't know, I think those stories are really informative. At what point, Derrick, did you say, you know what, I think I want to become a diversity consultant? Because, you've been doing this for, God, 13 years now. I mean, you've been at it for a long time.
I've been at it. So if you look at the work I was doing in schools, so that was I started teaching in 1998, and always doing diversity in schools, either as a teacher or sitting on diversity committee or being director of community life and diversity, and then starting my own practice in 2009.
Wow.
And of course, people thought I was crazy because 2009, remember, there's this little incident with the economy. And they're saying, why would you abandon, a nice New York City independent school salary to go out on your own in the middle of the economic crisis to do what? 2009, there weren't a lot of people doing diversity work as a consultant.
Right.
Right. And so when I shared this with people, even in my master's program at Columbia, everyone who was in that program is now head of school somewhere, some big fancy school. And when we came back from our first year, and everyone's saying, I'm the head of school of this place, I'm the head of school of this place, I'm the director of whatever at this place. And I came back and I said, I'm going to open my own business and become a consultant. The head of the program looks at me. Some of my friends are like, you want to think about this? But I knew, going back to what I said earlier, going back from the little kid, going back to the under-resourced school, I knew where I had come from. So I knew if I put my mind to it that I would be able to do this. And my closest friends who know me, who know my story, they had no doubt. There are a couple that come to mind now who remind me, they said, one, I knew this was going to be your path. I knew you were going to be, this international consultant. We always knew it. But one in particular said, and I laughed. And people will come to me and they say, is Derrick going to be okay? Is he going to be able to pay his rent? Is he going to be able to eat? I mean, I know he left this great position and now he's starting on his own for diversity work. And again, those who knew me knew that I knew what I was doing. So, the decision for me was clear when I was, again, I'm connecting dots now. My music teacher told me, if you do not wake up every morning and want to sing, you should not become a teacher, or rather a singer. When I was in this, arguably one of the most elite independent school graduate programs there is, called the Klingenstein Program at Columbia University, and I'm looking around at my friends and colleagues and seeing the passion they have around being ahead of school, I didn't have it. I knew then that was not the path for me. That was not the path for me. And so, again, I had to think about, what is the passion that I have? The passion is around people. The passion is around diversity, inclusion, belonging, whatever you want to call it, cultural confidence, social emotional learning, character development, integrity, whatever you want to call it. I want to bring people together around commonalities while recognizing the differences and recognizing that the landscape is not even. What are we going to do about it? I want to be that person. And it became crystal clear to me at that moment that I could not do that as a head of school, me personally. And I could not do that with the constraints of being a leadership role in one school. I thought there was much more that I could do.
So you were thinking about scaling even back then?
Even back then. The
Yeah.
reason I, transitioned from being an administrator in a school to being a consultant is I wanted to impact at scale.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
So looking back at your story up to this point, you've spent a lot of time in education, a lot of time in music. Where did you pick up the entrepreneurial skills? Where did that come?
So it's really interesting. I never thought of myself as an entrepreneur. And then I was speaking to my friends and like, are you kidding me? Your entire life, you've been an entrepreneur. And it's true, right? So I think about, in high school, it was always thinking about ways, because I don't come from means. And there is a program at Northwestern called the Cherubs program. And I need to get these skills to be the best musician I can be. How do I make this happen? I need to write an essay. I need to talk to someone about a scholarship. I need to see if I can get a summer job. I need to create an opportunity. In college, I had work study. And I have jokes with some of my friends that we talk about who had the most work study jobs, right? So I was TAing in French and TAing in Spanish and TAing in Italian and TAing in piano and TAing and all of these things, finding ways to make it work. When I was a teacher in New York City and, going from Wilmington, Delaware to Groton, Massachusetts to New York City, and coming to New York City and earning, less than $60,000 and living in New York City and thinking about this is not going to work. I need to do something. I began tutoring, right? And so all throughout my time in New York City, I was teaching or being an administrator, tutoring, and trying to sing opera, right? And going off to the summer programs and doing all of that. So by the time I became a consultant, while in education, there's like the sort of, people are averse to business and business terms. Yeah. And I was as well. But I realized that in fact, in creating this consultancy, I was creating a business is what I was doing. And luckily, I was able to draw upon all of those skills that I had needed to sort of earn sort of revenue to be able to do the things I need to do, not having come from means. I was able to then think outside the box and do, as my grandfather used to say, do what I needed to do what I needed to do. And so I knew that I had a safety net. That safety net was in New York City, I could tutor and easily make my salary as an administrator, easily. The worst thing that I could do was to fail and then start again. And I was fine doing that. And so that was how I began this work. First in schools, I was in New York City, so in the tri-state area. And then I just made cold calls to major metropolitan areas, to Atlanta, to Los Angeles, to San Francisco, to Austin, to my hometown, Chicago, and spoke with people and said, I had a network from having been in the space and said, look, I've been doing this work for X amount of years, and now I'd like to do what I've done in organizations. I'd like to do that at scale. So I'd like to have a conversation with you about how I can support you. And that finding a big fish in the major markets and knowing that if I got that client and I did well, that it's a small world, they're going to speak. This is before we had social media, that they're going to speak to other people and the network would grow. And then the next piece, so at this point, I'm already thinking like an entrepreneur, but I wasn't calling it that. I said, this is great. I want to work around the country, and I want to impact not only in schools, I want to impact more broadly. And so I had a wonderful opportunity to create this TEDx talk around the double-edged sword. And that was probably the next milestone in my career, because folks outside of schools and outside of New York and some of these other major metropolitan areas heard that. And I began to get phone calls from nonprofits and from businesses asking if I could support them in their diversity and inclusion efforts. And, you have to fake it until you make it. So the first couple of clients I worked with, I had never worked with a nonprofit before. And in fact, I vividly recall sort of falling on my face, almost and working with a nonprofit, an education nonprofit, and working with their C-suite. And I came in thinking I was working in an education space, but an education nonprofit space is not an education space. It's a nonprofit business space. And my framing was all off, completely off. And sort of 5 minutes into it, going back to that singing sense, I sensed that this message was not resonating the way that it needed to, and regrouped. And from there, working with tons of nonprofits, began to work increasingly with businesses, and then working internationally as well.
What were some of the early challenges? I mean, I love that you cold called all these places, right? Like, how did sales feel to you at that early phase of the business?
It's interesting, again, because of the theatrical piece of my background, the opera piece, the being on stage piece, and that's authentic, certainly. But there is a how do I reach people piece of that. It didn't feel uncomfortable to me, speaking to people, because, again, there's the preparation piece. I knew that I was prepared to do what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't selling them a lemon. I was telling the truth and knowing that once I got in, that I'd be able to hit the home run. And so that part didn't feel uncomfortable to me. The challenge that I like about, particularly about being a consultant, is, I mentioned the metaphor of the home run, is that you're only as good as your last gig. And so you have to be consistent at hitting home runs. And again, it goes back to my music background. My teacher always said, you want to sing so well that your worst singing is better than someone else's best. And so just coming in there, knowing that you know what you're doing, you have your content, you're open to being adaptable and humble, and coming in there and making a difference. So I knew once I got in, I knew what I was doing.
When you talked about consistency, I mean, you talked about purpose early on, right? And so that purpose must have made it much easier to be consistent, right? That constant drive.
Knowing that this work, and I mentioned earlier, so when your passion is your vocation, it makes it really easy.
Right.
My pleasure reading is reading about cultural anthropology, is reading about sociology, is reading about best practices around improving diversity and inclusion, is watching documentaries. So I embody my work. And in as much as I embody my work, I'm constantly pushing myself to be the best that I can be. And in being the best that I can be at my work, it is mutually beneficial to being the best person that I can be as well. So it's been a win-win situation from the beginning.
It seems, Derrick, I'm going to try to get this question right. So in the work that you do, especially now, you're now a leader of leaders, or is it a teacher of leaders, or a combination of that, or did I miss it altogether? Is there something else?
And a student of leaders, right?
Sure.
Because I'm constantly learning and growing.
Yeah.
I often say when I work with groups that I probably learned more from this than you did, because every group is different,
right.
and every group is pushing me in a different way, is pushing me to curate content in a different way, to make it meaningful in a different way. The presentation that I create in New York City is not going to resonate in Seoul. It's not going to resonate in Hong Kong. The student talk that I give in Chicago is not going to resonate with the C-suite for the financial services that I'm working with. The framing that I do for Pooch, right, a fashion brand, is not going to work at Sesame Street. So I'm constantly pushing myself and learning from folks. It's all diagnostic for me. I'm taking in all of the data. I'm probably my worst critic. I read these surveys and people think they're being critical of me. I'm more critical of myself than anyone has ever been. Supporting folks at all these levels, right? So in an organization, right? And at the individual contributor level, at the managerial sort of space, and at the C-suite space. In a school, at the student level, at the teacher level, at the parent level, at the administrative level, at the board level, at the membership level. So thinking of, some of these membership organizations, and I'm supporting them, and also I'm learning and growing from them as well through engaging through these just the diverse problems of practice that I'm solving for keeps me relevant as well. And being humble and reaching out to folks when I don't know something, and reaching out to this board of directors, as you mentioned, and learning and growing from them as well. And also part of this, I think, is letting people know when we've reached when we're in a zone that is not my expertise, and saying, I'm going to recommend you to this person. This is their jam. Right. I'm going to recommend you to that person, and not seeing myself in competition with others.
What role does creativity play in keeping you, just excited and engaged? I mean, because I know you've got this, extensive musical background. Are you still able to tap into that as your part of your daily?
Oh yeah, I sing every day in the shower. I warm up every day in the shower, and I mean warm up like operatic warm up in the shower. And I still sing periodically. I still give I give opera master classes. I'll be back at my alma mater at Merit Music in a few weeks to work with the students there, and I still perform at concerts. I probably sing 4 or 5 times a year. So that means I have to stay in shape. I can't open up my mouth and they say, "Oh, he's a consultant. That's why." I mean, he's good at that, but he probably should be singing. Yeah. So that keeps me relevant. I still practice piano. I still want to pick up my violin. I haven't done it in a while, but that's on my list. I'm constantly, if I don't engage in some type of creative process around music, because that's really sort of my creative outlet, I'm not me. I'm not whole. And then the work that I do, and people are surprised sometimes when they say this, the work that I do is extremely creative. It's not that I create a PowerPoint and then there's a template and I just sort of use it over and over. No, I'm constantly updating my work and using, something happens yesterday, it's going to be in my presentation today. And so that is a creative process. The design of the work that I do is a creative process.
Derrick, your business is almost 15 years old now. And I think I saw a stat the other day, like businesses that get to this point, like they're far fewer than you might imagine. Like it really is it's a challenge to get to this point in a company's growth. What are some of the things that you've learned over the last 15 years that give you, that make you look to the next 15? I mean, like what can you point to?
A couple of things. One, I think just how fortunate, how blessed I feel that, again, that who I am and my passion in life is also my work.
Okay.
So there isn't my work is crunching numbers and who I am is something different. So in as much as I want to remain vibrant and remain relevant, my work is going to benefit from that as well. The other part is just, and I think this is just who I am as a person, and also maybe you could argue just my unique path to get to where I am, is the idea of adaptability, that I can track where I am and sort of, I don't need to, there's not a linear pathway between A and B to me. There is the goal that I've set, and then I expect that on that road that there are going to be some surprises, and I'm going to have to think about the impact of those surprises on my goal. And I'm fine with also modifying my goal. So being adaptable and being flexible, I think, has been a key to being effective, really. The other part I think that's really important is, again, this comes from singing, is really being honest with what you're bringing to the table, and what you're not. And being as objective as you can be in being diagnostic about yourself and your value proposition. And if it's relevant or not. And if it's not relevant, you need to find out what is relevant, so that you are relevant. The other thing I think has just been important to me is, and I'm certainly not perfect at this, but determining what are the optimal circumstances for me to hit the home run. What do I need in terms of environment? What do I need in terms of sleep? What do I need in terms of diet? What do I need in terms of how much time I'm focusing on work versus how much time I'm engaging in self-care? That the notion that my body is part of my instrument, and if I don't take care of that, then I'm not going to be able to perform. Has been really really important as well. And then I think that board of directors keeping me humble, and pushing me to not rest on my laurels. I think about when I was creating the TEDx talk, the friend that invited me to present, I was very busy. I was flying all around the country at that point. And I said, thank you. And I'm not quite sure if I really have time to write something, but I'll put something together. And so I took one of the workshops that I had and I sort of reimagined it and I shared it with him. He said, it's good. I said, I'm sorry. I said, no, he said, it's good. I mean, it's not your best, but I mean, it's okay. It's great. I mean, it'll be fine and I said, excuse me? And he pushed and he said, you're much better than this, but if you're comfortable settling with this, that's fine. And I needed that push.
Wow.
And that push is why we have the TEDx talk, right?
Right.
So yeah, those are just some of I think when I think about, it's not a secret, but certainly for my recipe for being in this space, for the amount of time I have, I think those have been really important. And I would say, Peter, statistic, I'm wondering what that statistic is for my field. I have to imagine it's far fewer years. I can't think of many folks who have been in diversity and inclusion for 15 years as a consultant.
So Derrick, as we close the pod, we like to end with this question, and I'm super curious to hear what your answer is. Like, if you had an opportunity to do it all over again and walk down either this path that you've taken or a different, leadership journey path, which would you do?
That's a great question. And I've thought about it many times. And each time I reflected and I've become more certain in my response. And I've heard this from many people, so it may sound cliche, but I wouldn't change a thing. Because if I were to have a different course or a different path, I wouldn't be who I am today.
And
so if I think about some of the adversity, I've encountered early on, things are outside of my control. There've been lessons from that. When I think about, sometimes I wish, gosh, what if my undergraduate, instead of being languages, were like psychology, right? And instead of my master's, instead of it being, education, what if it were like, I don't know, organizational development? And my doctorate, instead of education, what if it were like, I don't know, something else? Then I really think I would have been set up in a different way. But I was like, no, not so much, because the music is critical to who I am. The languages are critical to who I am. That I was a teacher is critical to who I am, to my approach to how I see the world. That I was born in Chicago. That I'm Christian. All of these things are part of who I am. When I've fallen on my face and had to sort of regroup and figure out what are the lessons learned here, all of that has informed who I am and the path that I've taken. So if I had to change anything, I guess maybe make two of me would be that, because I have a sense that whenever, God calls me up there to do diversity work in heaven, that I want to leave here. I can see it already. I'm going to be the person who is on the deathbed, not thinking, gosh, I've done everything that I could have done, or thinking, wow, I regret having done that. I think I'm going to be the person, what I envision, I'm the person saying, I'm really proud of what I've done. There are some mistakes I made. I've learned from those. I hope that, I haven't harmed anyone along the path. And when I die, people are going to go to my computer and they're going to see a calendar of all these things I have planned, right? Like the Derrick Gay concert. They're like, he's 98 and he was planning on singing a concert, right? Writing that 12th book, like he was still going to do that. He had vacation plans to go to Bali. He was having lunch with a mentor the following day, right? That's what I want. That's how I imagine that there's going to be so much more to be done. I'm just part of that, part way on that journey.
Well, that really is a great way to end, Derrick. But I have one final question: Where can people find out more about you, or where should they follow you?
Yeah, they can find out more about me at my website, so www.derrickgay.com. But they can also follow me on Instagram, so just Derrick Gay, my name, DerrickGay, or Dr. Derrick Gay. And they can also follow my food adventures on The Bold Foodie. And I share all of the amazing food that I get to eat when I travel the world. So yeah, you can follow me there, and I'm hoping to be much more active in sharing the stories, just the incredible stories that I am engaging with folks all around the world.
Well, Dr. Derrick Gay, thank you for sharing your story today. And I have to echo, Brendan, you got to follow his Bald Foodie Instagram account. Like, it's legit.
As soon as we're done. I don't follow you. As soon as we're done, I'm on it.
Okay, good.
Thanks, Derrick.
Derrick, thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Leadership Backstory. Make sure to subscribe from your favorite podcast player and leave us a review if you like what you hear. We appreciate you sharing your feedback with other listeners. Peter Barron and Brendan Schneider host the Leadership Backstory. Catch you on the next episode.